everyone. We are here today with Hunter Albright, who is the CEO and co-founder of Curve10 and also a faculty member at the Leeds School of Business at Colorado CU, University of Colorado at Boulder. Hunter, thank you so much for being with us. Can you give us a quick intro to kind of who you are and what you're doing here?
I would be happy to. So it's a pleasure to be here. So I lead Curve10. Curve10 is a software and algorithm innovation company. So we do a lot of work in AI and blockchain related areas, as well as I do teach at CU, as you mentioned, in the engineering school where I teach the introduction to blockchain, as well as I lead the University of Colorado Blockchain Alliance. And for me, it's a ton of fun. I have, after getting my PhD, I spent most of my career in the commercial sector, in particular in commercial finance or in consumer finance, running credit card and loan portfolios for banks around the world. And so for me, all of the innovation and the disruption that's happening with blockchain now is fantastic and really enjoying it.
Awesome. Well, you're obviously the perfect person for us to be chatting with today. The topic of this talk is to kind of discuss blockchain and innovation writ large. So to help us get started, can you just give us kind of a 30,000-foot view of the current need for innovation using Web3 technology based on all the experience you just talked about?
Yeah, so I typically use the sort of story that, where if you think about sort of comparing blockchain to the internet, we're in sort of like 1995. And so we're not really even where there's a lot of use cases, and in particular, where people are applying a lot of new models to existing problems. And so I think one of the things, that I would love to see and encourage people to do around blockchain is don't apply sort of the same models we have today using blockchain technology. Really try to think about how to create brand new models. And so I think we have to, as a collective group, get to a place where we are experimenting more and actually having more failures and more learnings in order to get to that better place. And I think also then in conjunction with that, there's a lot of work and a lot of conversation around innovation around the back end, around scaling, and things of that nature. But for me, a lot more innovation is needed on the front end and on the use cases. Really believe that we've got to bring more people into the world in terms of being able to integrate with the technologies, build front end interfaces that work more closely with what we're used to in terms of Web 2.0, and so the current applications we use, in order to more rapidly grow the user base. And so I think we really have to be doing innovation in three different tracks, one being sort of the back end with how fast the blockchains can run, how many transactions, and so forth. And then on the front end, how do we make it super easy to use, that people are attracted and they don't turn away from it because it's too hard or too cumbersome or just a pain in the ass to use, as well as then just really developing use cases that they're super excited about.
Yeah, I love the way you frame that, kind of the back end, kind of technical underlying piece of everything, and the front end in terms of the user experience, but then wrapped around all of that is kind of the purpose, right? The use case and user. But it sounds like, from what you're saying, there's a lot of opportunity for disruption given kind of where we are in the evolution of Web3, even though, as you said, we're kind of in the mid-90s if you're comparing to early
Web2. Well, and I think the expectation is we'll advance probably twice as fast from a technology sort of innovation perspective compared to the internet. So where the internet really took, I would say, from 95 to 2005, to fully go through a cycle until you started to see a lot more applications and widespread adoption of sort of internet usage in business applications and faster growth and more stability in those commercial applications. We might see that in sort of 5 years with sort of the blockchain related aspects. And I also think that the other thing that around an innovation point of view is really going to be the sort of permissionless and fully permissioned, and where in the middle do we get the innovation? And there's a balance in there as we start to look at where there's real meaningful problems to solve. So we shouldn't shy away from solving a meaningful problem if it's permissioned, because that gives us great experience in terms of doing the front end, all the middleware services, as well as the back end. Even though aspirations might be to have more applications that are permissionless, it's just, I think, going to take longer to get there, especially in certain areas.
Out of curiosity, like you're saying certain areas, where do you think that disruption is going to come from, like in the blockchain space?
So there's three areas that we're seeing a lot more work taking place. One is on the finance side, and that is, I think the finance side is fascinating because you've got the big banks trying to justify and sort of maintain a little bit of their market share by applying blockchain. I don't know how, in many cases, how authentic that is. They're trying to do blockchain because they know it's a potential disruptor, but whether they're truly trying to adopt disruptive business models, that's sort of going to be sort of remain to be seen. I think sort of the unbanked and sort of the unbanked or the non-banked people in the world will really be where a lot of disruption is driven, because they are willing to overcome some of the hurdles of the initial applications because of their need for those capabilities. And I think I tend to talk about innovation of, if you have a good idea, it's okay for it to be a diamond in the rough. And if it's adding value, it will get polished over time. And I think for that group of people, if it just looks like a big rock, they're going to jump at it. As long as it's helping them solve their need, even if it's not perfect from sort of a user interface and an overall speed and process. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot with sort of the cryptocurrencies now. The other areas that innovation, I believe, is taking place more quickly are the more enterprise and corporate areas in terms of supply chain, where you've got either governments or big companies. They realize the benefits of sort of the smart contracts, really having sort of the immutable history on the blockchain, as well as the speed and the efficiency of the machine-to-machine or the automated contracting throughout a process adds substantial value. And so those are areas where we shouldn't shy away from having, in my opinion, trying to find more disruptive solutions, even though it might not be the perfect sort of application or sort of philosophical implementation that people want, but they still add value, and it still will provide, I believe, the community a lot of great learning of how to overcome some of the key challenges.
So what do you think, it sounds like you kind of got a perspective on this, what do you think the role of the incumbents will be in this whole process? Because it sounds like you're talking about a lot of the big user and use cases being kind of out there, kind of people that potentially the incumbents aren't considering now, but at the same time, you did mention kind of enterprise and their role of understanding some of these stickier problems like supply chain and the benefits of things like smart contracts. So how do you kind of see the balance of kind of the new arrivals in the space and the incumbents kind of duking it out for innovation in the next 5 years?
I think that's a really good question. In my mind, we're going to have a sort of a real spectrum of what the applications end up being, where, the incumbents might focus more on really sort of applying existing models and integrating blockchain into it and trying to take advantage of some of the benefits. But I don't believe we'll see them truly adopt distributed business models, which are the things in my mind are going to dramatically disrupt sort of industries and the ways that we do things today. I think in general, and history shows us that will be driven by sort of new entrants into the space. They can start with a fresh sort of clean slate in terms of building the application. And they also don't have as much to lose. It's always a really hard battle with the incumbents about how willing are they to launch a new product that's going to cannibalize existing revenues. Even though it makes complete sense for them to do that in a long-term perspective, we have seen that companies really struggle with that transition.
Right. It's the innovator's dilemma, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, and I think as we are sort of like the people from the outside kind of working towards disruption, how do we create that opportunity for disruption, like being on the outside? What tips do you have for creating space for like truly disruptive innovation?
So a couple things. I think the first thing I would say is really, especially within sort of the hackathons and the events like this, is don't compromise on thinking big. Think as big as you can in terms of as an audacious idea, and think about areas where you can help the most people and you can start to create sort of a movement, if not the value of the individual transaction, the value across of a collective group. And I think if we're going after things that we would really like to see in terms of changing the world with different applications or really changing the way things are done in a more dramatic way as opposed to incremental way. So I think that's the first one, not to limit ourselves. I see that happening quite a lot. And the other thing I would say is I tend to use a really sort of simple sort of, 3 items to think about is one, really get focused on the audience. And so really understand who you're trying to solve a problem for. Secondly, what is the change that you're trying to help them make? Like, where are they today and where are you trying to take them? And being super clear on what that change is can really help you define what you need to prioritize with the product and how you might be able to drive the innovation. And then the last one is really be able to articulate the benefits of that change. It has to be a little bit like we talked about earlier, has to be meaningful for them to want to, if it's not perfect, to overcome some of the challenges. But, I think we need to be, in general, we need to be better product marketers, along with being great product developers as we look at sort of Web3. Talking about all the cool tech it does is great, and sort of a lot of audiences will love to geek out on that. But I think to get more people to try it and help them overcome any of the reservations that they might have to try it, we have to be better at talking about the benefits, the way a lot of the tech companies today have gotten really good at sort of promoting the product and letting the tech or the how they do it almost be invisible. You think about, hey, we send an email now, we don't talk about sort of all the protocols that are used to send the email. And so if we keep talking about all the technical elements of blockchain, then we're just losing time. We're not sort of advancing that narrative about helping people understand the sort of application of it and the benefits and not worrying about the technology.
Awesome. Yeah, as a side note, if you're interested in the idea of developing disruptive ideas, we're going to do a separate video with Hunter on actual frameworks for that. So check that out on our YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe for that, because we're going to kind of release some of the frameworks in addition to giving a full kind of deep dive on how you actually might do that kind of nitty-gritty process of developing really truly disruptive ideas. As we're just kind of wrapping up here on kind of the broad spectrum of thinking about blockchain innovation, any parting thoughts for us, Hunter? Any resources we should check out? Kind of anything that we should keep in mind as we're getting into this field and the idea of kind of disrupting it?
A couple things to limit. I just reinforce the idea of not limiting yourself or not limiting sort of the concepts of what you think will be possible and to give them a go. The second thing is to really put the technical and the scaling challenges aside. Go after the front end, go after the use case in terms of where you want to try to make a difference. Don't worry about if you really need it to sort of have a transaction every 10 milliseconds for it to be scalable. I truly believe if we can build valuable things and bring people to the table, then we'll all collectively have the motivation to solve the technical problems.
Yeah, completely. I love that. Staying problem focused and making sure that we're actually solving a problem that someone needs solved. If we're doing it right, even if we're doing it on paper, prototyping at a very low fidelity level, and starting to see traction, we will solve the underlying technical challenges.
And I think that's right. I think the ability to inspire others, even if it's a non-working demo or a non-working piece of software, is fantastic, right? It would be great to see more stuff that comes out of this hackathon and other sort of projects where people are branching off really initial ideas and we're taking them in very different directions, but we're quickly iterating as a larger group together. That's where we're really gonna keep the disruption. It's not going to be a small group. It's going to be us sort of putting our heads together and creativity together for a larger benefit.
Totally. Well, thank you so much, Hunter, for taking the time to chat with us. And we'll see you guys soon.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.